It's 11 o'clock, the appointed hour, so we'll get the show kicked off. It's going to be quite a full hour. There'll be times for questions at the end, but if I understand if people can't hang on, no problem. But we'll try and answer as many as we can today. Anyway, let's go. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar on principles and best practices of emergency response. My name is Steve Taylor. I'm Managing Director of IAS International. The presentation today will be delivered by our Senior Risk Consultant, Ben Murrell. If you have any questions during the presentation, please send a message using the chat box. We'll hopefully have time to answer some questions at the end of the presentation, but if not, we'll email everyone with a list of all questions and responses. We'll also send a copy of the presentation. On to Ben. Ben is an internationally recognised emergency and crisis management expert with over 30 years of operational and strategic leadership experience across military, corporate and high-risk environments. A certified protection professional and member of the Security Institute, Ben has built and led emergency response systems in some of the most challenging operating environments worldwide. His expertise spans incident management, executive crisis training, enterprise resilience, and full spectrum planning, from tactical evacuations and anti-piracy missions to cyber incident response and continuity planning for global corporates. His early career as a Royal Marines commando included active deployments in the Gulf, Norway, and sub-Saharan Africa, which laid a foundation of calm, decisive leadership under pressure. Upon leaving the Marines, Ben followed a well-travelled route into private security, but then served as head of security operations for Shell Nigeria, where he managed emergency response for complex onshore and offshore operations in one of the world's most volatile regions. After this, he joined Transocean in a senior global security leadership role, overseeing critical infrastructure and emergency preparedness for international offshore drilling operations. Ben travelled the world with the Marines, lived in Nigeria for 10 years and in the UAE for the last 10 years plus, so has extensive experience of living overseas with the challenges this brings. With decades of first-hand crisis response experience, whether managing live incidents or designing resilient systems, Ben brings a pragmatic, experienced voice to conversations on leadership, preparedness, and organisational resilience. Over to you, Ben.
Oh, thanks very much, Steve. I'm almost looking to my left and right to see who this Ben is, but I guess it's me. So thanks for the introduction, and thanks to Chris and the team for giving me the opportunity. Okay, so as Steve said, in way of introduction, we're going to mainly focus on the principles and best practices of emergency response. And, you know, this is really to allow you to benchmark from an industry standard where you are currently, and just give a little food for thought of considering if there's any areas of opportunities to improve what you're doing. I would say that, you know, I've looked at the participants today, and I can see that we've got a wide range of participants and organisations represented. And I can see that the likelihood is that you're all at, you know, various different levels of maturity within emergency management. So I will be covering, you know, some of the more strategic elements, but also, you know, really down to the sort of tactical operational aspects themselves. So hopefully it will be a sort of a refresher for everybody. So as I said, let's sort of start with the basics here. It seems like a sensible question to kick off, but, you know, what is an emergency? And I think, you know, I'm going to use various terminologies, but for the context of today's webinar, holistically, they'll cover the sort of same umbrella. So you will hear the terms of crisis, emergency, incident, and event. You know, the definitions themselves are fairly similar, and they really sort of define the level of severity of the event that we're looking at. But, you know, the same applies that an emergency is obviously unexpected. It has a high impact event that requires immediate action, primarily to protect life, but also, property, our assets, and obviously in the environment they work, then obviously the environment is extremely important to us. So again, as a sort of kickoff, just to get our juices flowing, get ourselves ticking over, let's just sort of consider how we think of the different types of emergencies. And I think from our, mainly from most of our perspectives, we're considering this under the realms of health, safety, security, environment. So let's just sort of think about those first. And so, under that sort of health aspect, we have day-to-day workplace accidents and incidents, and these can be in the office, these can be at the workplace, these can also be obviously during travel. And these can be a range of type of medical events, whether it's just falling over and hurting yourself, or whether it's more serious like a road traffic accident. And obviously the pandemic that we've all, struggled through has really been something from an emergency management to make us reconsider how we think about these things. So, natural disasters, and I guess those of us that are from the region, at the moment, for example, I'm dealing with a company that is having impact from flooding in India. We also had our own flooding, funnily enough, in one of the sort of driest places in the region in Dubai. We did have extreme flooding, and we saw the impacts that had on just, our employees and actual business continuity. Also things like the LA fires, and we're seeing, these type of natural disasters as, the global environment is changing. We're seeing more of these, and we have to obviously be at the forefront of managing them. Well, fires, explosions, and again, examples that I've sort of come across in my sort of recent time in the region. There was, back in 2020 in August, there was the mass explosion in Lebanon port. And again, had massive impacts for the company that I was supporting at the time, with a number of their operations based in that location, and certainly employees and assets directly impacted. And again, here in the region, it's not uncommon, it's unfortunate, but, fires in tall buildings, certainly where we have employees, and even though, they may be on personal time, it still has a potential impact. And we'll talk about this a bit more, about where your duty of care extends to. Different organizations will look at this slightly different. There's a regulatory component. There's more of a consideration. Are these people on business and our direct responsibility, or just from the culture of our company, would we go the extra mile to help people that, that their homes have been impacted over the weekend? And that's some of the things that we have to think about when we're actually designing our emergency response plan. What is expected of us? What would we do, and what actually, probably we can't do? Something that's all in our minds, and those that, either attended or plan to attend the recent IADC conference in Doha, you can see these things happen pretty, one, without a lot of warning, and often at a time and a place that we least expect. And again, that was something, even with your group, I was consulted to give a view, and we're seeing more and more of, situations of this nature, not just in the region, but throughout the globe. And the likelihood is we're going to see more global conflicts, whether it's, what's happening in China, Taiwan in the future, the outcome of, Lebanon and the impacts around Israel and Gaza and such forth. So all those will have, a direct or indirect impact to some of our operations. Again, I'm using two examples here, cyber breaches, and I'll come to one other. but the level of reliance that we have on systems, on IT, even now, if there's a power cut where I'm sat now, everything goes off, you don't get a presentation. But, we are getting further and further reliant on these systems. And if there's a breach just within emergency, then, our number one method of communication throughout the organization stops, and our ability to manage that situation. So, cybersecurity and breaches of that is becoming much more prevalent in how we look at emergencies. And then, it goes without saying too much, unfortunately, in our environment, environmental spills and related hazards. So there are sort of bread and butter, let's say, and things that we sort of expect that we're going to have to be involved with. But in the wider sort of functional strategic positioning, as a business, we have to think of other potential impacts. And I mentioned cyber breaches, but also if you think, in recent times, I was supporting a company that was involved in the power disruption in Portugal and Spain. And again, it really brought almost all of their organization to a halt very quickly. Fortunately, it was resolved and back up and running within a relatively short period of time, but it did highlight that we're in a different type of environment now, where the reliance on power, IT, infrastructure is really extreme. And just as an anecdote, one thing that really stood out for me was the impact on people. Literally, some of the employees, once the IT system went down, and then their phones and close sort of IT systems went down, really it became almost like a mental health issue for some people. That the ability just not to be able to email, not to be able to look at their phone for a period of time. So it actually had a hidden consequence that really hadn't been thought of before. Of course, legal, we see that regulatory bodies impose sweeping new rules, often without warning. And again, these can have serious implications to our business. So within, the sort of, let's say, the emergency stroke crisis management structure, it may be that, us as the sort of physical HSE type people within the team, it may not be primary for us. It may be more of a legal or regulatory driven emergency, but still there'll be likely to be areas that will play our part. And that sort of goes into, reputation. Everything that happens to our business, the likelihood is it will have an impact, and especially when we talk about media and how these things with social media are in the public domain very quickly, then the likelihood is, there will be reputational impact. Even now, I'm supporting a company with an office in London that is, simply being targeted for supposed relationship with Israeli government contracts. Now, again, you could say that's sort of reputational crisis, but what is impacting is actual protests outside the office directly impacting employees. So it may be reputational, but as a team, there may be, different aspects, both from health, people getting injured, safety, security, and legal, so this is why you have a multifunctional, multi-level approach to emergencies. And likewise, sort of financial crisis. Maybe it might just be that, a major supplier that you're pretty much reliant on, or one of your major stakeholders or partners declares bankruptcy, and the impact from then has a knock-on effect to you. So again, things that we may not think about immediately. And again, I've been supporting companies and actually been privy to companies that are thinking about things like supply chain disruption. And this might be, caused by the instability of global tariffs, and companies thinking, well, if my rig stopped operating and I needed a part, how quickly and easy and at what cost can I get it due to the new regulatory requirements and costs of tariffs. So again, you can see how the wider operations have to think of the cross-functional impacts. And again, lastly, but a sudden CEO resignation, maybe it then sort of exposes failures or dysfunctions within the board, and that then has a knock-on to the share price. And of course, as a business, we're saying our number one priority is our people, but ultimately we're in a business to make money, to turn revenue, and an impact to our share price is going to overall potentially impact how we operate. So again, just to sort of just to get you thinking a little bit more, not just tactically, but also from a strategic perspective. Right, now let's drill into the sort of the tactical part. And we said that people are our number one asset, which of course they are, and also people are critical to managing emergencies. So what sort of characteristics are we looking at? And you can see them there. I'm not going to read through them, but I think the thing to highlight is that hopefully, when you're employing good team members to your organization, as a matter of course, you're looking for these. But when you bring a team together, you've got to think, look, what could happen here? And I'll give you an example is, we had a team together with all these attributes. There was the earthquake in Istanbul. And so we brought this team together, or we tried to bring this team together, only to find that we couldn't find them. And why? Because they said, look, I can't deal with this emergency now. I've got to go home. I've got kids in school. I've got my houses being impacted, my relatives. That is my number one priority. So you have all these skills, but can that team, are they able to operate, in different situations? And again, we'll look about, the impact on those team members that we wouldn't actually know until a time of using them. And again, just the physical ability that, unfortunately, generally an emergency doesn't start at 9 o'clock on a Monday and finish at sort of lunchtime. It will happen at the most unattuned time and date. So middle of the morning on a Sunday, and suddenly you've got to get in touch with these people, and they've got to have the know-how and the ability to get centrally to a location and start operating. So we've got the basic factors. And some of them, just I'm going to repeat time and time again. And certainly, the training is key, because each one of these people will have a particular skill set, but we're bringing them together to effectively solve a cross-functional, multi-level emergency. So how do people generally react? Either physically at a point of emergency, or even in managing as part of a team. Well, you've probably heard the term before, fight, flight, or freeze. That's our natural instinct of survival. And so in knowing that, and it isn't something that we would know until that person is directly impacted, either at the scene of the incident directly, or even within, an emergency team that may be some geographically, distance or location away from the direct emergency. Of course, in dealing with an emergency, there's stress and there's confusion, which will impact decision making. The mind works by having mind maps, so that the more you do things, you develop a map in your head, and that's pretty much, used to what you look at. So as you go out your door, go to work, you know where your car is, you know the route. In an emergency situation, it's like opening your door and you've come out of somebody else's house. It's a different car. You don't understand the routes. You're in a different country. Of course, that's going to cause direct confusion. And that's in reality what your mind is trying to overcome. Your normal map that you have for everyday operations suddenly is disrupted. And so, that is a real thing that we have to consider. And of course, people in that state, they want to know what's happening, they want to communicate, and they want reassurance. what does that mean for us then? You know, even before we get to deal with the emergency, what are our considerations from a leadership perspective within the team? Well, of course, you know, as a team, as a structure, we need to be calm. We need to show, you know, management visibility. We need to be supportive. We need to be able to create space. You know, we've got everyone in a room, and perhaps even at this point, I'll mention that, again, how we've moved on. The days of managing emergencies where we would all come to the emergency response centre and we'd start to put things on walls and we'd get bits of paper out and checklists. Companies are still doing that, but we saw certainly with COVID, for example, where we had to keep operating. People are working from home. And so, you know, often now people will be operating remotely on tools such as using today, or it may be a hybrid where you've got some people in one location and others bought in. But, you know, we've got to consider that. A lot of companies are familiar with this, certainly in the energy sector, where, you know, at a certain point, regular opportunities throughout the emergency, we take a time out, we stop, we say, right, stop everyone what you're doing, put your papers and pens down, take a few deep breaths. How's everyone doing? And you just take a turn to go around the room and just do, you know, almost like a welfare check of everyone, make sure that everyone is focused, make sure that, you know, stress and anxieties are being managed. And you know, any actions that you as a leader, as part of that team may have to take. And it may be that you need to, you know, change out some of your teams and bring them in. And that's another point, that you can't operate with a single point of failure. You need to have backups, you need to have extra people that can come in, because an emergency, as I said, isn't going to be a sort of 4 or 5 hour event. It could go on for days, certainly weeks or months. And you know, again, it's good practice within a firm generally for employees, but certainly when you're putting them under this extreme, unusual situation, to have some form of professional, mental and well-being support. Right, let's sort of dive into more around the process now, the sort of nuts and bolts. So we're going to talk about the plan itself and keeping to the emergency response plan. And this is going to seem a bit in conflict, because I'm going to talk about it in two ways. So certainly keeping discipline to the plan matters. And of course, it ensures coordination across the roles, across the organization. And we'll see this, that as an emergency develops, the chances are you're going to have lots of different teams operating at different levels, still holistically managing the emergency, but you know, you'll have them at the scene of the situation, you may have them at the local office, you may have them at your regional headquarters, and you may have them at your sort of corporate headquarters. So, you know, operating, and it's got to be done in coordination, and it's got to be done consistently. And this will obviously reduce then any sort of confusion or guesswork how you approach. And it should be a framework. Again, the old days of looking at emergencies were where you had this sort of 100 or 200 dusty page book on the shelf that almost said, look, if there's an emergency, take 2 deep breaths, take 10 steps to this seat, sit down, get this board out, you know. And we found that when it got to the emergency, that just was not fit for purpose. So do you have the 200-page manual? No. Do you have nothing and make it up on the fly? No. So what you do is have simple and effective framework with step-by-step SOPs, generic, that can be adapted for the situation. And this then establishes, you know, clear communication channels. And we'll talk about communication a little bit as we go through. So what do we need? Well, we certainly need up-to-date emergency response documentation. And again, this sort of reflects of what information you have in that plan. Because in that plan, if you have all your team listed and you think of the normal sort of turnover of a firm, it may be that almost on a weekly or monthly basis, you have to change some of the details there. So, you know, you have to consider that. Otherwise, it might be just one sentence that in an emergency, you go to this room, or in an emergency, you go to that room. In an emergency, if they're working from something from, a previous plan, one or two sentences could severely impact how the operation is conducted. You hear this word again. What you must have: regular team drills and training, and we'll look at that in more detail. Obviously, everyone needs to have easy access to up-to-date contacts and protocols. They need to know, where do they find them? Are they on your intranet? Are they physically in a cupboard in a room? Do people have some access from their mobile if they're working remotely or traveling? And what can they get access to? As the famous philosopher said, everyone's got a great plan until they get punched on the nose. And this, really does apply to what we're talking about today. And this goes to my point of having that 200-page plan, that as soon as the first thing happens and you get punched on the nose, you suddenly realize that that plan is not going to work. And so, emergencies will test the best plans, certainly. This is where I'm saying that there could be a bit of a contradiction to what I'm saying, is that you have a plan, but you've got to have flexibility. You've got to be fast thinking, and the team must trust, when things go off script, that they can adapt. And this goes to an earlier point, that what's the most important? It's not the plan, it's the people. The people make the plan work. So, that is why it's so important to select the right people, have a framework, and then do practical training and drills of the situations you're likely to come up against. So now, just as a strategic perspective, there are numerous global standards and regulatory bodies that govern emergency management. And depending on where you are in maturity, may define, where you decide to go. I'm not going to read through all these, but you can see that certainly at the top there, we have ISOs, various ISOs that define emergency management and business continuity. So I would advocate that even if you don't have this up and running and you don't have a direct intent to get certified, already you should start looking at these, investigating, see which one would best suit your organization. Probably, rather than go for certification, start to apply it in the terms of using the same methodologies, using the same language, the same terms, the same definitions. And then when you put it in your own management structure, what you can then say is that from an emergency management and business continuity perspective, we align with ISO 22320, or we align with 20301 business continuity. That keyword align. And as you do that for a period, it actually helps. Certainly I deal with a number of pre-contracting RFIs and RFPs, and certainly from you guys, when it's an energy sector, there's a whole spreadsheet of 40 HSE type questions, and it takes some time to sort of dive into all your relevant document framework to find the correct answers. But at least that's one of the benefits, that all you would do to answer that is say that we as a company are certified with ISO and we apply, those structures, or, we are aligning with. So something to think about. And I think just to bring this to bear, and one of the things I'm going to talk about, and I actually mentioned at the front, is part of the purpose of attending this presentation is just to think as an organization, where are we? And so a lot of what's written here is what I'm talking about. So firstly, you obviously have got some form of awareness and buy-in to actually be on the call. And so to think about, which ISO are we looking at, or which process are we aligned with? And then you do that gap analysis from what I'm talking about, what from that ISO says. Where are we as an organization? Where do we want to be? And how do we then fill that gap? And then, working down there, from number 2 to number 8, it gives you various steps that you can take really to complete that gap analysis and work out what is your plan for continuous improvement, what's your trajectory of improvement. So again, I won't read this now, but it will be shared, but I think, it gives you an idea of what you should be thinking about. There are various companies, and again, I'm sure that a lot of you will have already existing contracts with these companies, but certainly, external support in some form is fairly critical in emergency management to some degree. What do they do, or what can they do? Certainly, they can do horizon scanning on your behalf and look at incidents, alerts, and provide notifications. That helps you just being a few steps away in your preparation phase. They can link into your Workday or your HR systems and start tracking where your employees are. So not only are they monitoring, geopolitical situation, but they're tracking that in relation to where you've got assets, where you've got business, and where your people are. And then, of course, they have tools and applications to enable you as a firm to be able to, in a time of emergency, reach out. You can account for people, you can give them advice. So it may be just a single message, look, there's been an explosion near the office, don't come to the office. Or it may be there's been an explosion very close to the office, are you safe? Or do you need additional support and you've called the emergency services? So you can use it for various aspects. I think one I'll just touch on there because it actually was a real situation only of a couple of, tying it back to the situation in Doha where I did launch a mass notification. And at that time, the company in question put that polling message, I am safe or I need support. The after action review of that, my question was, right, if your employees came back and said, I need support, what are you going to do and what can you do? If you then call that person and they say, well, look, I've been hit, I'm under rubble in a building, and I'm severely injured. Are you setting an expectation that suddenly somebody in your organization is going to be there and start digging them out? So that was a little bit about what I put as the message is, I am safe or I need support and have called the emergency services. But again, this is another thing that before you get to dealing with an emergency, as a group, you have to think as a firm, what support can we give? If there was a flood in Dubai, what physically could we do? Would we do? And you have to decide on that sort of things before you get to the emergency. Very important. They'll bring process to your system. So they can help develop your standard operating procedures, basic step-by-step guidelines, and also the protocols, all those things about what you can do, what you can't do, your messaging, all those things can be developed in support by a vendor. They can help you with assessing the risk. They can help you doing drills and thinking about your continuity planning. As a process, they can also link to your underwriters and insurers. And again, for example, if it was a medical situation, they would know the employee, they know who your medical provider is, they can link the two together, and then they can help, help with that medical support or evacuation. From a subject matter expert perspective, obviously, you're experts in your direct area of operations, but they can bring, a wider spectrum of advice from industry specific to risk expertise and even around compliance. So again, an external resource that you can leverage on. And I spoke about, tied to insurance, but in some specialist situations, it may be that, you have a gap in your team or you have a specialist need. And this could be medical. Have you got access to a doctor? Can you get them quickly on a Zoom call and get some sort of medical feedback or advice? If it's an evacuation, again, do you need people on the ground to help you with that physically? Do you need somebody that is on call to advise you? Evacuation is fairly specialist. So if you don't have in-house capacity, this is where an external support could bring you. Again, you know, kidnap and ransom, a very specialist type of response. So, you know, I'm using that as an example, but, you know, this is the sort of things they bring to bear. One outside of convention is, we're going to mention this again throughout, is media linked to reputation and communication is a big part of business continuity and how you are successful on navigating your way to carry on getting back to business. And again, it may be that you have a media team within your group. If not, certainly having a media capacity on call as an expert advisor is something that it may be something that you consider. And again, they can help you with that sort of development of your plans, your strategy, and also, you know, implementing that as part of after action. And certainly all those things, myself and Steve as a team can also support you with. On the ground, again, you know, you have that 24/7 operations center that anyone can call and get access to these tools, processes, and advice. Also local support teams. And again, I provided this for Lebanon, for example, at the first stage where missiles started to move up from the south into Beirut, where we actually set up local teams that were going around to our employees' homes on a daily basis, checking up, offering advice, how they were prepared, making sure that they had ample infrastructure, food, water, power. And that was a big, real sort of peace of mind for those people. So again, is it a requirement? Is it a company culture? Is it a duty of care? It's available, but again, it's one of those things that as a firm you consider before you get to that stage. And again, on the ground support, whether it's medical evacuation, you need physical security teams, as I just mentioned, or logistics to get people from one place to the other. So a lot of services, there's hundreds out there, and I've put a local vendor, Securo Group, who's out there that is strong in the region. And then you've got other ones you've probably heard of who are more the global players like Crisis 24, International SOS, Control Risks. What you tend to find is that they've come and grown from one domain. And if I use ISOS, you know, they were a sort of medical support provider that then bolted on other safety and security aspects into their portfolio. Likewise, Control Risk was more of a conventional security provider. And at the time, you know, a number of years ago, supporting companies working in extreme conflict environments. And then, of course, they grew the medical aspect. So, you know, they all come from somewhere and they're all a different fit to your organization. So again, you know, they're all there, but that's something to consider. What is the right fit for you? What are you looking for? The recommendation then is that, you know, we said earlier on that everything doesn't always start on a rig and develop outwards. There are relevant or various types of emergencies that your organization can be exposed to. So what you need is some form of cross-functional early warning horizon scanning that basically monitors from legal, reputation, health, safety, security. All of those aspects are covered, and you've got a collective there that is scanning the horizon and then basically assembling once they see something which within their risk domain is what they would define as some form of emergency. The standard thing then, you know, away from that, the standard structure is that, you know, you have a local response team, whether it's on the rig or if it's a life safety team in the office that deals with trip, slips and hazards or fires or immediate response. You then have that more tactical strategic support, not directly at the scene of the incident, a step away. It may be on shore base, it may be at your country office or your regional office. And if you remember what I said, I mean, at the form of some incidents at small local teams, you might only have 2 or 3 people there that can actually directly get involved. So what they may be looking for is extra people, extra advice, extra resources. So forming up a regional tier 2 tactical team may be not to take over the incident, but to offer additional support and resources to help that team. And it should always start off, is reaching out to the incident team and say, look, what do you need? What can we do to support you? Of course, they will still maintain that overall strategic position and be thinking upwards at, the business and the business imperatives and the strategic positioning of the business. But, they have a sort of a foot in both camps, if you like. And then the term that, we started off with, this crisis management term, this is your highest level of your organization. This is where, first of all, there was a fire on the rig. Then, unfortunately, the rig got impacted and became, non-operational, multiple fatalities, other contractors, other contracts in the region are asking about the contracts with your firm. It's now got to such a big situation that something that started off relatively manageable now has potential to directly impact your business. So this is a strategic team that are looking at how do we keep the team, how do we keep the operation and the business operating. Now that's a conventional structure. It's a guide. And that's the sort of thing with emergency management. We spoke about the plans, but you must have a structure and a framework that is suitable to your organization. So what do you need to do first? Well, in any situation, there is lots of information. Certainly with the, the development of social media, you'll find that there's so much information going on. If you look back over a few days ago at the start of impacts to Doha, to Qatar, how quickly did you get to know exactly what was happening? There's loads of planes, there's missiles, people get injured, flights are down. Can you start to make really good tactical decisions based on that? No. So really what we're talking about here is before you do anything, you take deep breaths and you really verify what are you dealing with here. Because if you don't get that right up front, you're going to be using the wrong resources and allocating and making poor decisions. One that I use almost all the time as a simple analogy is that you're walking along, you pass a lake, you see a child drowning, you think, okay, without verifying, you just dive over and you dive in to save that person. And as you're diving in, you think, I can't swim. Now, that isn't the right time to make that decision, and that isn't going to be helpful to manage that type of emergency. What should happen? Take a few deep breaths, consider, verify, and make some decisions. How do we make these decisions? Well, again, all of us, or most of us today, from the roles that we sort of lead or are part of, should be very familiar with risk assessment. And so we should really drive everything we do in emergency management through risk assessment. We may not be the experts to all of the parts of this. We are a facilitator. But what we do, we know how to do a risk assessment, and we get the right people from the right functions that have the right qualities to solve the problem, and we get them round and we do that risk assessment. So we understand, the organization that we're trying to support here. We think about, right, within that organization, what are the assets? Is it all people? Is it the rig? Is it the office? Is it the reputation? Okay, what is really under direct emergency here? What do we need to protect? And you need to list those. What are the assets that need protection? Right, based on the situation that we've verified, what are the vulnerabilities to those various assets? What's the vulnerability to our people? What's the vulnerability to our asset, to our client, to our reputation, to all those other things that we laid out there? And then this is again why you need that cross-functional approach. We as good HSE people, if we're from that domain, probably are pretty good at identifying mitigations within our area of responsibility. But can we do the same for legal reputational? So we need to get the right people. We then need to take the steps to decide. And then it's really, you know, the action and that continuous monitoring, review and updating. So we know that. So it's just really a headline of how we approach these things. So I think the highlight here is that we need to identify what those key threats are and what are the effective assets, get the right people informed and involved in that risk assessment. Think about how does us as a firm operate? What's our risk tolerance? Because, you know, what we need to decide on here is based on the risk tolerance and the culture of the firm that we're working for. We need to document this, and again, documentation is very important. Just on the, you know, the micro stage is that you making that decision, maybe handing over to somebody in a couple of hours that have to take that on for the next couple of days. They need to have a reference point on what the decision was, what the rationale was. It may change. It may start off as a small fire on the asset or in the office. It may look that potentially you have to evacuate and shut down the whole office or the whole asset, and then suddenly the fire's under control and you don't. So it might start off as an event or an incident. You might then sort of categorize it as an emergency or potentially a crisis, and then very quickly it could reduce again. It's that flexible approach. So what does a great response look like? Well, of course, you know, life is our #1 priority. Follow the plan, but that plan can be adapted as needed. Communication is key. Getting everyone on the same channel. It's very easy in an emergency for lots of people within those teams to be communicating in silos, lots of different email chains. You need to set up something with, this is our firm's emergency management email address. Let's get everybody on that and let's record it and let's collectively keep that single form of truth. We need to get people in the room. We might not get all the people. We've got to think, right, who are the people that we've assembled as a quorum? Let's assign them roles. Let's allocate resources and tasks to them. There are other people outside that room that need to be aligned. We've got clients. We've got other contracts running. We've got embassies. We've got law enforcement. You know, we've got people that are providing manpower. So not only are we dealing with something, there's lots of other stakeholders that have also got a piece of the game here. So when considering this from a strategic position, we need to think, how do we tie all this together? So we spoke about this, verify. At all stages, we do nothing until we verify. Yes, a missile has struck a location in Doha. It has definitely happened. Let's get members of the IADC together and let's discuss what is going on here. What do we know? So we pull everyone together, we assemble. Is this an incident? Is it an emergency? Is it a crisis? Who do we need on the team to deal with this emergency? And that's that sort of categorization. Right, we've made some decisions. We need to account for everybody. In this situation, it might be, right, who do we have directly already at the location that might need information and support? Who is about to get on a plane? Who is making decisions whether they should or shouldn't come? And what are companies doing? So we need to have that passage of information. And then we have to start delegating. You know, once we've come to inform people, right, okay, so we're going to have somebody that is now re-looking at our conference. How many people are now coming? What does that change? Have we got delegates that are still going to be able to present? Have we got an audience? So, you know, that might be one role. I'm using this just as a typical example because it's at the forefront. But I think you get this, the idea of we have to apply a process, and it's very easy. And what you often see is leaders or maybe others that aren't directly involved in the incident, as you're still trying to verify, as saying, right, well, let's stop this and let's start this and cancel the event and let's do all these other things. And you say, well, just wait a minute. Take a few deep breaths. Let's see what's happening. Let's get the right people in the room and let's think this through. So this is the sort of framework that I would suggest to adopt in some way. Appreciate we're getting short of time, so I'm going to sort of go through some of this a little bit quicker than I'd like, but please ask questions. Families is important, and it will be a big part of your time. If you've got 100+ people on an asset that is being impacted, the chances are that most of those 100+ people will have a family, will have next of kin, and the chances are that most of those will be calling into you, asking for information, asking for support, and that could potentially be 2 or 3 of each of those. So you may have 100 people on your asset directly impacted, but 300 phone calls coming into you wanting information. And it's important that families are, really kept supported. And so having a team to do that. And again, I emphasize again, you need to know what support can you give and what are the limits to that. If these 300 people all want to get on a flight and go to a remote hotel in a remote country to be near their relatives, is that practical to, get 300 flights, move them somewhere? It might be, it might not be. But these are the sort of things that you need to think about. We spoke a little bit about this, but make sure that you centralize all the information that is flowing here. And I've highlighted all the different ways that it could be moving around. Prioritize by urgency. Everything needs to be verified. It may be that you've got somebody from legal in your group. It may be that you form part of your team just to be doing this as a full-term job. Certainly, if it's information that is going to go internal to your people or go external, outside of your company, all that needs to be verified. You need to designate official communicators. Normally, it might be somebody from your legal department, but if you remember what I said, this is where you may need to leverage on external support from a media perspective. There are tech tools with the evolution of AI that can really expedite some of these processes. The media, again, the days of controlling the media are over with social media. You need to think about appointing somebody. It needs to be fact-based and it needs to be coordinated. You're not going to start assigning blame to others. You're not going to start contradicting what you're telling internally, externally, and you're going to keep monitoring what they're saying and adapt your storyline to what is out there already. The chances are, while you're thinking about assembling your team, that emergency could be live streamed on Facebook by somebody within your employment. And so the days of getting ahead of it are far gone. But media and families are the two key elements among making sure that people life safety is number one. But these are some of the sub elements that really need consideration within that emergency management. The business must go on, so even when you're dealing with an emergency, already you're starting to think of business continuity. And it may be even while you're still dealing with the emergency, there are people in your team starting to think about the early stages of business continuity. At some point, if you think about COVID, at the first week, it's going to be a major disaster. We're going to have, mass fatalities. It's going to literally down the business. Within the second, third week, you realize, okay, well, we're going to work from home. Business is going to continue. We're going to keep working. So already you say, right, this is no longer a direct life threat emergency. We're now moving on to longer term business continuity. And you see with COVID, it could go on for years. So you need to cross-train, you know. You may have a small organization, so just finding an emergency management team is one thing, but cross-rolling them into business continuity and also having redundancy, that not all of them are going to be around all the time. And we often work remotely now as a hybrid model. Test and update plans. So again, I think we've covered this. So again, in the order of time, but I would say, for all the reasons that I've highlighted, have a dedicated log keeper, probably somebody from legal. Make sure all of the stuff that you're doing, all the decisions, everything that you've thought of, you've rationaled, it's documented and it's maintained. Training, make sure everyone in the team is trained. You might just train the relative response team. You may just train the media team. You may just train the incident team. At some point, you're going to do a regular exercise where you stand up the whole team in your organization together and make sure that all aspects of it work seamlessly on the asset, in the office, at the regional, at the corporate, at the crisis, and all the sub-elements are also fully trained, conversant, and confident to operate together. Senior management, okay, media, okay, business continuity, relative response. We suddenly said, look, HR are going to have a lot of things to think about and manage. A lot of moving parts. An incident will generally start relatively small and will grow arms and legs pretty quickly. So just having the thought to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of that is pivotal. Test your plan, conduct after actions, implement or improve your plan. Consider external facilitation. This isn't something, you know, you really need somebody there that can think about what your scenario is and think about all the different levels, look at your plan, think about, you know, where the value is, where the opportunities are, and to actually get you as a team to get into dealing with the emergency rather than thinking about how the training is being conducted. Again, this is something from IAS perspective, we're quite able and happy to help you with. And the scenarios that you use need to be realistic. And what might have been a unrealistic scenario yesterday may suddenly be realistic. You know, a missile strike close to where you've got a conference in Doha as an example. So what's the next steps? For the people, know your roles, do exercises, get involved, participate, and individually share feedback. You'll see something that other people don't. Think about what I said at the takeaway from here. Audit what I've said here against what you're currently doing. Think about where are you from a benchmarking perspective. Brief your leadership, get buy-in. You know, any improvements is going to need time, resources, and ultimately finance. Update what you've got. Make sure your documents and your processes are relevant and they're up to date. Train it. Get yourselves up together and do regular and realistic drills and training. That's the only way that you have confidence that this system will work. After action reviews, again, self-explanatory, incorporate that into concurrent improvement and learning. Preparedness, risk assessment, communication, and teamwork. Okay, that really is the summary of, I hope, what I'm going to leave you with at the end of this presentation. Thank you very much. I'm about on spot. I would have liked time to take more questions, but let me hand over to Steve.
Hey, thanks, Ben. That was great. I'll put my IADC hat on, and our sort of mantra is to meet, share, and make a difference. And what you shared today was fantastic, and hopefully will make a difference. We got one question from Callie, who runs the chapter mental health initiatives. What approaches can support psychological safety and mental health for the team and the individuals impacted?
I mean, there's, you know, lots of companies out there that provide this. Certainly your medical provider that you'll have from an insurance perspective will likely have an aspect of this. All the big providers, Cigna and others, have this as a key element. So go back, look at your insurances, look at what's out there. You may find that you've already got it. It's a case of leveraging on it. I'll provide more details in the post answers.
Thanks, Ben. Another one was how often should teams practice and review their plans?
So again, once you adopt a regulatory standard, that will define. But certainly, there should be an annual basis of conducting training. Every time something happens, you should do an after action, and you should revisit and incorporate those into your plan. So certainly, every time something impacts your plans to be done, then certainly on an annual basis is normally from a compliance standpoint.
One thing that jumped to mind when you were talking, I remember an example, and this is like 25 years ago. It was on a platform that we operated on, had a helicopter incident, and the guys were watching the television in the rec room, and they heard this chopper incident in North Sea, realised it was their chopper, and it had to head back to the rig. And with that, they heard the helicopter approaching. So 25 years ago, the media were on top of these incidents that fast. Nowadays, with social media, it's going to be an awful lot quicker. So I know from a personal perspective, you mentioned reputational and so on. I think that's going to be key for a lot of our members here today in terms of being aware of that and taking proactive steps.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same example. I mean, I was part of a team that was putting an initial holding statement out there and saying, look, the situation is under control, we're managing it. As they saw that, there was somebody live streaming on the rig a major fire and saying things that were fairly different to what we were going to put out.
Yeah, got a great question. I want to maybe finish with this one, but thank you, Prince, for this. How do you balance speed of response with accuracy of decision making during an emergency?
It's a judgment call. I mean, I can't give you a black and white answer. The situation will dictate, but certainly the more training and experience and practice you get, the quicker you can get it. I think the standing point is that, you must go through those stages. And, this is VACID, the verify, the assemble, all those points, but certainly the verification before you start and the assembling and acting, the situation will dictate. It could be very quick, it might be minutes, literally minutes, but at least you've gone from one phase to the other. It could be longer.
Great, thank you. That's a question we got so far. We've run out of time. We did it pretty well. Thank you, Ben. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. Hopefully all you listening in did as well. If you have any questions, please get in touch with me directly or through Chris. And as mentioned, we'll send out a copy of the presentation with some of the questions and responses later on. Thank you very much. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
See ya. Thanks, Ben.